Are electric motorcycles actually good for the environment? Many people believe that their gas-powered equivalents to these electric motorcycles are actually better than these basically very dirty in their production electric motorcycles. So what, at the end of the day, is the actual truth? And with that, welcome back to the Free Miles MC. First of all, this is a very complicated question because this is very multifaceted. You have the production of the motorcycle, which is very CO2 intense, and then you have the whole life cycle of this motorcycle while this bike is on the road. And of course, you also have the minerals that are needed to produce this bike, which are also pretty rare. And at the end of the day, one important factor is also the whole culture around the consumption of these motorcycles. So where at the end of the day are we standing with electric bikes? The first point is how much CO2 is actually released into the air when producing these motorcycles. Roughly the biggest point is the battery. In the production of the battery, you will roughly set out 100 to 150 kilos of CO2 per kilowatt hour that goes into this battery. So, at the end of the day, a really big electric motorcycle with a 17.3 kilowatt hour battery like the Zero that we have standing here will roughly release 2,600 kilograms of CO2. With a smaller motorcycle, this number can be anywhere between 1,500 all the way up to basically 2,500, and for the really big ones we're talking up to 3,000 kilograms of CO2. When it comes to their gas-powered equivalents, they roughly release 500 kilograms to 1,000 kilograms for a mid-sized motorcycle, and everything above 1,000 cc is going to go up to 1,500 kilograms of CO2 in its production. As you can tell by these numbers, the electric motorcycles are there obviously worse than their gas-powered equivalents, but how is it over the whole life cycle of a motorcycle? When we're talking about gas-powered motorcycles, they roughly, on an average fuel consumption, will release about 9.9 kilograms of CO2 into the air when being operated. This equates a CO2 release over the whole lifespan of 5,940 kilograms of CO2 plus the production of the motorcycle. So how does the electric motorcycle in comparison square up? That is a very complicated question because that depends on the grid mixture of the country that the motorcycle is driven in. But in general, we can say that even with a very bad grid mixture, this bike is always going to be cleaner than its fuel injected counterpart. In the worst case, this is going to have 4,000 grams of CO2 on 100 kilometers, so 4 kilograms, that's less than half than the fueled motorcycle. Of course, with a better grid mix, you will also have a cleaner electric motorcycle. There are some countries like Norway that have a grid mix of like almost 98% of renewable energy. And of course, something like that can reduce the emissions of a motorcycle like that down to 200 grams on 100 kilometers. Overall, you will be reaching emissions of 120 kilograms to 4,000 kilograms over the whole time of use with a 60,000 kilometer lifespan. I think that's realistic with a battery if you ride the motorcycle relatively much in over the years, because electric motorcycles, their batteries basically suffer more with time and with every winter that they're going to experience. So when does a motorcycle like this reach its break-even point? Assuming that a gas-powered motorcycle is going to expel 100 grams per kilometer and an electric motorcycle from an average grid mixture about 20 grams, and the gas-powered motorcycle has 1,000 kilograms of CO2 emission in its production, and the electric motorcycle like this 2,600, you will reach the break-even point after 20,000 kilometers. So you drive this motorcycle 20,000 kilometers and then it becomes more green than the gas-powered equivalent, which I would say is pretty good, as I've bought a Royal Enfield Interceptor about a year ago. I ride it roughly half a year of the year and I have reached 20,000 kilometers by now. But how does it stand around the rare materials that are in these batteries? specifically cobalt and lithium. First of all, companies are constantly trying to get rid of the necessity for these materials, as those are very rare. We have, when it comes to lithium, about 22 million tons on our planet. No one knows exactly like how much there actually is. It's a rough estimate, and they roughly mine about 100,000 tons every year. Of course, that's going to exponentially just go through the roof with more and more electric motorcycles and electric cars being on the market. Also, those materials are mined in China, Australia, Latin America, and very newly also in Germany. When it comes to countries like Latin America and also China, they are most likely not mined in the nicest conditions for the local population, and there are most likely severe human rights issues there. Speaking of human rights issues, the other material is cobalt. Cobalt is 60% farmed in the Congo. When it comes to cobalt, we roughly have 7.1 million tons of that material on our planet, and around 140,000 tons are mined every year, with the same situation of that consumption going up exponentially and completely through the roof. And of course, they are mined in miserable conditions. Of course, when talking about the mining of cobalt in the Congo, there are a lot of very bad things happening, like displacement of communities, child labor, also conditions that, if I talk about them, this video will 100% get demonetized. I sadly had to cut the part of the video where I talk about the workers' rights situation around some gas-powered motorcycles and also cars. But one thing is definitely clear, is that many of the materials that are needed for electric motorcycles are also needed for the production of catalytic converters and things like that. And also that new cheap motorcycles on the market, there's a reason why they're cheap. They're not getting produced in the nicest conditions, of course. They're getting produced where it is cheap, and usually cheap means not the nicest worker rights situations either. It's a bit tough kind of weighing up different kinds of human suffering with each other. That really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So let's get back to the main issue at the video. On top of that, as we already talked about the rare minerals, of course these batteries can be recycled. But you can only recycle something to a certain point. Of course, there is going to be a big industry about recycling these batteries in North America, where right now, for example, Zero motorcycles are being produced. As at some point, if the battery reaches 75% of its charging ability, it's going to find other use. Well, is it really going to find other use? Not really, because right now battery technology is so cheap that companies rather use completely new battery cells than buy already used ones out of old EV and electric motorcycle batteries. But in the future, the more we're going to run out of lithium and cobalt, this recycling industry is going to rise, also because they just save the way, as most likely those batteries are then already in the countries where those motorcycles and also cars are going to be produced. This very neatly brings me to the next point. We are at some point going to run out of the rare materials when it comes to these electric motorcycles and the electric cars. This is not for me to bash electric motorcycles. We're also going to run out of the resources that are needed for gas-powered cars and motorcycles at some point, which very neatly ties all the points of the lower emissions and the cost of life and human suffering caused by the EV industry neatly together in you cannot really consume yourself out of a big problem. We have a big problem with climate change. It is very apparent, and it has been apparent the last few years. I know there are people that don't believe in climate change, but I think it's very telling that those circles have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the last few years as we've started to feel the consequences more and more. We actually used to have a point in Germany a few years back when even far-right parties were believing in climate change. That looks a lot different now. And in general, I think it's pretty safe to say that we cannot consume ourselves into a better future. It's kind of like being severely overweight and thinking all you need to change is drink Diet Coke instead of regular Coke. That shit is not going to work. And the same situation is happening with electric motorcycles and also gas-powered motorcycles. The end is just reached quicker with gas-powered motorcycles than with electric motorcycles. I think it's important to realize that other ways of transportation are very important. Also, two-wheeled ones, especially bicycles, because bicycles can be very practical in a bicycle-focused city. Of course, this stuff has become part of the culture war. Oh yeah, we don't want walkable cities. We actually here in Germany have a party that currently is like, oh yeah, we need more cars again in the city. Have you ever seen cities like Wolfsburg? That shit looks terrible. Also, Hanover, my closest city, that's just not fun to drive around in a car or a bicycle. After all, stuff like public transport are amazing options for this kind of stuff, but for that, those options need to work. If I want to drive with the train all the way to Amsterdam, the chance is pretty likely that I'm not going to arrive there right now and definitely not arrive there on time, which is not a good situation. With a situation like that, you will not get rid of an insane car dependency. And is car dependency and motorcycle dependency really that nice for urban life? However, I really think that electric motorcycles have their place there when it comes to weaker electric machines, also scooters and all these kinds of vehicles that can also be shared, and in the city they can have a huge practicality. With me saying that we cannot consume ourselves to a better future, it brings me to a next point, and that is company culture of electric motorcycle companies. We have multiple electric motorcycle companies. I have had now contact with the Zero machine. I talked to the people of Black Tea for a video that never came to fruition, basically, and have also looked into Zero as a company. And it's a bit of a rough one, because the company culture, like Zero used to do things like have microtransactions in their motorcycle. This bike luckily does not have that. It's actually a good machine. Does that now really scream sustainability and caring about how sustainable something actually is? On top of that, it took them almost 10 years to release an owner's manual. This is not just a slight words against Zero. It is also something in the whole electric car thing, because those machines are really simple actually. And I am of the belief that if we would have gotten EVs and electric motorcycles in the 80s with that kind of company culture, with this amount of technology, the picture of them would be a whole lot different and a lot more people would prefer them actually. Because if those things would be more accessible to repair yourself with exchangeable batteries, like also some companies, there's a big project in Kenya actually where they have their electric motorcycle taxis with exchangeable batteries. If stuff like that would be more the case, then I think the image of EVs and electric motorcycles would be a whole lot different. And also with stuff like the additional power pack that you can buy for this bike, which basically has a different kind of slight battery chemistry, which results in a form of built-in obsolescence that you pay extra money for. That's not really, we try to sell a motorcycle to save the climate type stuff at all. With electric motorcycles and electric cars, we basically have been unlucky that those things are coming out in the time where this is what companies do. Because let's just not point at Zero and say that they do this. BMW does this as well. Every car you buy now is completely covered in stuff that you, God forbid, repair it yourself. So, yeah. Another topic comes to mind that would blow this video out of proportion when it comes to the discussion about electric motorcycles, and that is it still worth it? In my opinion, it is definitely still worth it, but the question is there. Are we throwing ourselves behind the train? Is there like a point to this? Because scientists have been saying this is going to be a problem 50, 60 years ago. People ignored it. Then 30 years ago, people were like, in 30 years there's going to be a problem. And right now we're still basically sitting here kind of shutting our eyes to this issue, except on a very small scale. So I think there's worth in trying. Of course, this is still very far away to be available to all people in a way that would make a difference. And I think if you are passionate about motorcycles and you also want to do something good for the climate, with the focus of the video also being that you cannot consume yourself to a better future even with these things, is I think the thing that you can do and that everyone can do is buy a bike on the used market. I think that is a great benefit, because at the end of the day, the most easiest thing we can all kind of do is work with what we already have. And I think that's a good point to end this video on. See you soon.